Hello everyone, this is Nadim and this is my serve, and I hope that you liked it, and I'm pretty sure you couldn't see the differences in my serve during these last several shots, so let's go through it a little bit more in detail, and then I want you to have an exercise to go into to get that effortless power that I hope you saw me exerting here, and what the part of the serve is I want you to focus on. What we're talking about is especially from a position where the racket has already traveled over to your hitting side, again, as you can see right here. And from this position right here, we would like to make sure that we do two things. We do two things that a lot of players and coaches falsely claim to be a wrist snap. All right. What happens is you will have an internal shoulder rotation at the same time as you have a forearm pronation. And that swing goes pretty much from this position on forward, where you can see me leading with the edge of the racket. And the racket, since it's going to be a quite fast serve, has traveled all the way over to the right side of my body. Okay, so from this position on forward, I then proceed to start pronating, which brings the edge, which is currently leading, okay, facing to the right side, which makes the racket face connect with the ball, okay? And then as that connection is done, I immediately continue an internal shoulder rotation, which brings the face that just hit the ball to face out to the right side, since I'm a right-handed player, okay? And that is the exercise that I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in just a moment. Once you get over to the hitting side, you want to focus on an internal shoulder rotation and a forearm pronation. We call this long axis rotation. You've heard that with Greg and other players and coaches talk about it. It's an incredibly important source of power that you need to exert. In this particular case, I know some of you were saying, hey Nadim, you're opening up quite a bit. Yes, I am, and that is a fault in my serve. I have that. I get away with it, but I wouldn't teach it. I would like for players to stay as side on as you see me in this particular frame when I make contact. Okay, so there's a little bit of leeway there, but I would not teach it this way. But what I want you to kind of see is, take a look at that internal shoulder rotation. And the serve, I didn't measure it, but I would say it's probably between 105 and 110 miles an hour on average. Let's take a look at the second one in this rotation, and you can see that I'm doing the exact same thing. The racket travels over to the right side. That ball goes in a slightly different direction, but another part that's very, very important to point out is, in order for you to have that pronation, in order for you to be able to internally rotate at the shoulder, you need to see this frame right here and see that the ball is on the inside of the racket. On my case, it's the left side of the racket. Otherwise, I cannot pronate with the forearm and internally rotate at the shoulder. If I have to chase a ball that is even just here or outside of that framework, I will be chasing it and therefore lose pronation and internal shoulder rotation, in other words, the long axis rotation, and therefore effortless power, okay? Very, very important. Let's see how this plays out. This is probably an even faster serve, simply because the internal shoulder rotation completed almost immediately after contact. And if you watch this particular part where you see the racket face facing to the outside, that means the player has not had any hesitation in accelerating. And if you see that the racket face, which sometimes does happen, face too far down, then you can argue that there wasn't enough internal shoulder rotation. Maybe the player was tight. Maybe the ball toss was in the wrong position. And there's many things that could have caused that. But we want to face on getting that internal shoulder rotation and make that part of our serve, regardless of whether we are aiming for the tee, whether we are aiming for the body, or whether we are aiming for the wide serve, and the same holds true also for the at court. We want to get used to utilizing the internal shoulder rotation and the forearm pronation. Depending on the spin of the ball, that level of which and the degree to which and the time at which you do it changes slightly, but the purpose is that you do have that internal shoulder rotation and forearm pronation. You can see here still the ball is on the inside of my traveling racket. The frame is clearly leading up to contact just before I make contact with the ball and then internally rotate again. This time that internal rotation happened a little bit later, which means that the ball is likely going to be more to the outside or therefore have a little bit more slice. Yet I am still having that as part of my swing. Let's go into the next one and see how that changes, if at all. Again, the racket travels to the right side of my body and is on the outside of that ball. I pronate at the forearm while I internally rotate at the shoulder. This is probably the fastest serve, I would assume, because yes, you see that internal shoulder rotation occurs immediately following contact. although the ball goes to the court. And you can see also by how high the ball bounces at the back fence there, you can see that that was probably a little bit faster than the others. And let's look at this one more time. Again, racket travels over to the right side of my body with all the momentum that was built up in that right to left and racket drop. Okay, racket travels on the outside of the ball, internal shoulder rotation with pronation of the forearm. And again, rather fast serve because the internal shoulder rotation immediately follows after contact. Okay, and another nice high bounce there. And the last serve in that sequence, same thing. I did try to go for either slice or flat on all of these serves, as you can see, due to the racket path, but this is important. And I reiterate this time and time again, the ball needs to be slightly to the inside of the traveling frame that goes up to contact in order for you to be able to pronate and internally rotate at the shoulder. So forget that whole idea of snapping your wrist. That is not happening. The internal shoulder rotation and the forearm pronation happen, as you can see here again. Ball is to the, racket faces to the outside, no matter where the ball ends up going. And my wrist in this position is actually rather flat. If you see players relax the wrist at the very end once the ball is gone and the racket tip travels lower than the hand, which you will see right here. At this point, my wrist is still completely flat. You can see my hand is still higher than the rest of my arm that's visible. And then I relax. That is not a wrist snap. That is just simply relaxation. So be very in tune and knowledgeable about what the racket is what the wrist is supposed to do and not supposed to do. And know that your forearm pronates, your shoulder internally rotates. Together that becomes a long axis rotation, which gives you a significant power source for the serve. So what precisely is the exercise I'd like you guys to work on? So you can see that I'm setting up at the service line. Forget the baseline. It's not about that at all. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to see through the flow of the motion as much as I can. Get that out of the way for the purpose of this exercise. Line up on the right side of my body. Consciously get into this position right here. Now what you will quickly see is that despite the fact that I am trying to keep the racket right where it is now as I toss the ball, you will see that I am relaxed enough and loose enough to where I let the racket drop in just a moment after I release the toss. But I'm starting consciously with 3/4 plus of the service motion already completed, trying to set up on the right side of my body since I'm a righty, so you lefties do it the other way around. You want to get into this setup position. Tip of the racket is pointing back. Toss arm is still calm and quiet. The elbow is about to lead to contact, okay? And as I toss the ball, I'm only thinking about relaxing so I can get a little bit of a drop before I lead up to contact, okay? Which gives me the ability to speed up even from here with quite a respectable speed. And then I want to be able to lead with the edge on the outside of the ball. And then here, this is an early pronation, which means the ball will be rather flat, okay? It'll be an early pronation, but you can also see that the ball is clearly on the inside of the traveling racket. Very, very important. And then the pronation and internal shoulder rotation can happen right here without any hesitation. Now, as you can also see in this particular serve, I am much straighter. I don't open up as much. I don't have as much speed. I'm not trying to hit the ball with as much speed because the purpose of this exercise is to make sure that I get this right, that I get that forearm pronation, which means I need to lead with the edge, and that I get that internal shoulder rotation, which means the racket face after contact has an outward pointing position. Okay, as you can see right here, pointing to the outside. In other words, you don't see any racket string. That is the purpose of this exercise. Let's continue that into the next one. I'm just going to go and walk this through. You can see right here something that I do as well, just to reconfirm, is I'm loosening up my shoulder, really shaking it out, okay? And then here on this one, I didn't go back and exercise the whole swing before starting. I line up on the right side of my body. Again, this is the important position to kind of think of. Tip of the racket to the back, already completed the swing motion up until this point. I release the toss, and then I have a little bit more momentum going into it. Again, important, the racket travels on the outside of the ball. The ball is on the inside. Again, a slightly open pronation for me because I'm hitting the ball rather flat. Again, you can see though that after contact, the racket face faces to the outside. We want to avoid that the racket face points down, and we want to avoid that any wrist activity is happening. Again, forearm pronation, internal shoulder rotation is what we're looking for. And I hope that this exercise here makes it clear. One more time. Here I'm going through the whole flow again, lining it up on the right side, tossing the ball, and then go through it again, where you can see that the racket face, even to this point, an exaggerated amount of time, points to the outside. Very, very important. And yes, on this exercise, you will see the racket face opening rather fast. That is because I want to hit the ball as flat as I can and get as early as possible into the internal shoulder rotation position. Okay, but you can hopefully see that on all of these serve, including this very last one that's about to come, that the racket edge leads the way. The wrist does really nothing. It's a forearm pronation, an internal shoulder rotation, and the racket face at the end of the day points to the outside regardless of where I'm sending the ball. Okay, so let's try that exercise at home. Go to the service line, line up the racket the way I have here. Let me give you this position that I want you to be in, which is right there. I want you to knowingly be in that position where most of the swing is already done. You toss the ball and then you swing from there. Keep in mind, this is not intended to be a full speed service motion, but a service motion that allows you to do the correct motion in and of itself, which is that internal shoulder rotation and forearm pronation.
The serve is, of course, the most important shot in tennis, and because so many players struggle with it, we now started offering one-day serve clinics. In these serve clinics, we'll break down your serve with video analysis and show you exactly what elements need to be fixed so that you can hit powerful serves. So if you're interested in finally developing a powerful serve with one of our serve clinics, click the link inside this video right now for all the details on upcoming serve clinics.